All right. So we finished the annals of what was it? um, axioms of intuition. Okay. And I've thought about that a little bit more. I think it kind of whoops. My mouse fell down. The more I thought about it, it kind of started to make a little bit more sense. The idea being, well, if we live in this kind of unit-based experience in the world, like, time and space can be measured in a unitary, I hesitate to say unitary, but in a way that involves dividing things up in a way that can be measured, and therefore it makes that experience kind of mathematical in a way, and that gives us the possibility, possibly the necessity that our a priori thoughts about mathematics are valid because we have this existence that is based on measurable things. I don't know. It started to make a little bit more sense to me. I'm not 100% sure I get it and or agree with it. Seems kind of, I don't know. Anyway, but we are moving on from that was the axioms of intuition, which dealt with intuitions as extensive magnitudes. That's like them being considered as units. That's how I've been describing it, at least. And we are moving on to the anticipations of perception. And in this episode, my dick cavit. Okay. In this, I'm also gonna read at this time. The analogies of experience. Oh no, wait. Yeah, the analogies of experience. It's effectively just an introduction. It's only like 4 pages. So yeah, that's what we're gonna read today. So let's get into it. Okay. 2. Anticipations of perception. Their principle is, in all appearances, the real, which is an object of sensation, has intensive magnitude, that is, degree. So a brief word about my understanding of this. As is tradition, I've watched Professor Gijsbers' videos, or single lecture, I guess, on this. And the same way I just described the axioms of perception. No. What is it? Axioms of intuitions? I think that's right. Axioms of intuitions. Yeah. Intuition. The same way in which that was concerned about what we just talked about, time and space being units that can be measured kind of size-wise, length-wise, that kind of thing. My understanding is the anticipations of perception in a similar way deal with the intensity of how things can be, like the spectrum, not based on extension or breadth or something like that, but rather other things that, think of anything that can be on a spectrum, like color, temperature, pain, things like that. I mean, everything, literally everything in the world. I don't know why I'm thinking of examples, but, everything in the world that can go from one extreme to the other. And so if you think about oh my god, why can't I remember it? Axiom of intuition. That's kind of dealing, like putting, like if we think about populating the world with these things, the 4 things that Kant is talking about, that would kind of put things, or at the very least give extension and space to the world. And now it's kind of like in my head at least, all right, we're filling in you know, I don't know, we're adjusting the contrast and saturation and temperature and, you know, the feel of everything, taste, you know, sour, sweet, whatever. And we're kind of filling in those things in this section. Okay, proof. Perception is empirical consciousness. That is, a consciousness in which there is at the same time sensation. Right? Appearances as objects of perception are not pure, merely formal intuitions, like space and time. For space and time can never be perceived in themselves. Appearances contain, therefore, in addition to intuition, the matter for some object in general, through which something existed, is represented in space and time. Appearances contain, therefore, in addition to intuition, the matter for some object in general. Okay. Through which something existing is represented in space and time. That makes sense. That is, they contain the real of sensation as a merely subjective representation, which gives us only the consciousness that the subject is affected, and which we refer to an object in general. Now, a gradual transition is possible from empirical to pure consciousness until the real of it vanishes completely, and there remains a merely formal, a priori, consciousness of the manifold in space and time. And therefore, there is also possible a synthesis in the production of the magnitude of a sensation from its beginning, that is, its pure intuition, equals 0, up to any magnitude of that sensation. Okay, so we have an intuition of some sort, and the possible spectrum for that intuition, a priori, is effectively infinite, at least the intuitions that we're talking about here. And is kind of unknowable or undefinable before we actually experience, I guess. Experience it. Okay. As sensation in itself is no objective representation, and as the intuition of neither space nor time can be found in it, it follows that although it has no extensive magnitude, yet some magnitude must belong to it. Okay. There's, you know, tasting something doesn't have like a measurable, you know, oh, I had 5 tastes there. Well, that would be the number of tastes you had, but you know what I mean. But there must be some measure to it, but that is like the spectrum that we're talking about, sweet, sour, whatever. Anticipations of perception. And this through the apprehension of it, in which the empirical consciousness can grow in a certain time from nothing to any amount. Okay, and we're, you know, here and available to experience that full range, or the possible range that we are able to perceive when presented with it. Okay, therefore sensation must have an intensive magnitude, and corresponding to the intensive magnitude of sensation, an intensive magnitude, i.e. a degree of influence upon sense, must also be attributed to all objects of perception insofar as the perception contains sensation. Okay? All knowledge by means of which I can know and determine a priori what belongs to empirical knowledge may be called an anticipation. Fair. And it is no doubt in this sense that Epicurus used the term, I don't know, what is that? Is that Greek, I assume? I guess Epicurus was Roman, right? So maybe it's Latin. But if it were Latin, it'd just be, I don't know why he wrote it. It looks like Greek to me. I'm not looking it up. I don't care. It's just showing off anyway, Kant. We get that you're smart. You read Epicurus. Who cares? But as there is an appearance... I gotta look up the footnotes bothering me. Okay. It's gonna take 20 minutes. Footnote 44. It's so dumb. I just wish they did 1 through a billion footnotes. It's just... I have to find the specific section. I gotta put the mic down. Get some ASMR book sounds in here. Was it 44? Yeah. Prolepsis, anticipation. See Diogenes Laertius, The Lives of the Philosopher. Anticipation. Great. I also don't understand, like, for footnotes where there's kind of a gradient of footnote, there's some footnotes that are just like, oh, hey, if you want to know more about this, go crazy. There's other footnotes where it's like, if it's in ancient Greek, I'm the word is in ancient Greek, maybe it's just Greek, I don't know, but whatever. If it's in a different language than the book is, it should be in a footnote rather than end note. These are end notes, I should say. They're not actual footnotes. That shit should be in a footnote. But the stuff in, the stuff that's like, okay, a little context for this if you want to know it, throw that in an end note. Anyway. Okay. But as there is in appearances something which can never be known a priori, and hence constitutes the real difference between empirical and a priori knowledge, namely sensation, as the matter of perception, it follows that it is sensation that can never be anticipated. That makes sense. Like, if you're just looking at something, you don't know, unless you've already experienced it, like, what's it going to taste like? Where is it going to be on the scale of sweetness? What color of red is it going to be until I see it? Etc. The pure determinations in space and time as regards both shape and magnitude, on the contrary, may be called anticipations of appearances, because they represent a priori what may always be given a posteriori in experience. If, however, there should be something that could be known a priori in every sensation, as sensation in general... Oh, that sounds like something that might interest Kant. Even if no particular sensation be given, this would, in a very special sense, deserve to be called anticipation. That makes sense. Yeah, okay. You can actually anticipate it because it's like has to occur. For it seems extraordinary that we should anticipate experience in that which concerns its matter, and which can be derived only from experience. Yet such is really the case. Oh, man. Okay, I gotta read that again. For it seems extraordinary that we should anticipate experience in that which concerns its matter, and which can be derived only from experience. Yet such is really the case. Let's see, Kant, prove it. Apprehension merely by means of sensation fills no more than one instant. That is, if we do not take into account the succession of many sensations. Okay, fills no more than one instant. That is, if we do not take into account... Okay, so if I have like a piece of chocolate cake, it's only actually sweet for the instant in which I'm experiencing it. But the succession of experience allows me to know that it in itself actually is sweet. Well, Kant would not say in and itself is sweet. It would say my experience of that appearance in the world, which is all that I really have, is subjectively me experiencing something sweet. I think. Sensation, therefore, being that in the appearance, the apprehension of which does not form a successive synthesis from the parts of the whole to representate. Okay, I'm just gonna reread that because I fucking muffed it. Sensation, therefore, is muffed like a golf ball is what I was going for. Maybe not. Sensation, therefore, being it's. Duff? No, whatever. Sensation, therefore, being that in the appearance, the apprehension of which does not form a successive synthesis, progressing from the parts to the whole representation, is without any extensive magnitude, and the absence of sensation in the same instant would represent that instant as empty. Okay. Therefore, as equals 0. I don't know why he keeps doing these like mathematical annotations, but that in empirical intuition, which corresponds to sensation, is reality. Realitas phenomenon. That which corresponds to its absent is negation, equals 0. Every sensation, however, is capable of diminution, so that it may decrease and gradually vanish. Between reality and appearances and negation, there is therefore a continuous coherence of many possible intermediate sensations, the difference between which is always smaller than the difference between the given sensation and 0, or complete negation. In other words, the real contained in appearance has always got a magnitude, though it is not to be met with in apprehension. Apprehension by means of mere sensation takes place in an instant, not through successive synthesis of many sensations. And so, it does not advance from the parts to the whole. Okay, I get it, but I don't really know the larger point he's making. And although the real has therefore a magnitude, it has no extensive magnitude. Okay? That magnitude which can be apprehended only as unity, and in which multiplicity can only be represented through approximation to negation equals 0, I call intensive magnitude. Sorry, I'm going to reread that. That magnitude which can be apprehended only as unity, meaning like a single experience, like he's talking about, a single instant, and in which multiplicity can only be represented through approximation to negation. Right, how far from actually not being present is this sensation? I call an intensive magnitude. Hence, every reality in an appearance has intensive magnitude, that is, a degree. If this reality is considered as cause, whether of the sensation or of any other reality in the appearance, for instance, of the alteration, then the degree of that reality considered as cause we call a moment, for instance, the moment of gravity. We call it thus because the degree indicates only the magnitude of apprehension, of which is not successive but instantaneous. Okay. I think he's considering these things kind of outside of time, which is why sounds a little goofy. This I mention here in passing because we have not yet come to consider causality. It's coming soon. I think it's like in the next... There's an introduction to the next chapter, and then I think it starts... No, because I think it's the second... Whatever, it doesn't matter. Second example. Every sensation, therefore, and every reality in appearance, however small it may be, has a degree. That is, an intensive magnitude which can always be diminished. Makes sense? Between reality and negation, there is a continuous coherence of possible realities, and of possible perceptions. Every color, red for instance, oh, look at that. That's the color I thought of, Kant. Must be a genius too. Every color, red for instance, has a degree which, however small, is never the smallest, and the same applies to heat, the moment of gravity, etc. This peculiar property of magnitudes, that no part of them is the smallest possible part, no part is simple, is called their continuity. Okay? Time and space are quanta continua, because there is no part of them that can be given as not enclosed between limits, points, and instants, and so no part that is not itself, again, a space or a time. That makes sense. Space consists of spaces only, time of times. Points and instants are only limits, mere places of their limitation. But places always presuppose those intuitions which they are meant to limit or to determine. Mere places or parts, as constituents that might be given prior to space or time, could never be composed into space or time. Such magnitudes can also be called flowing magnitudes. Is the point he's making, like, you can't add time to time because time, that's not how time works? It's a confusing way to say this, but I think that's what he's saying. Whereas you could add red to red and there could be a little more red. It would take time. Meaning, okay, I'm not being funny. Meaning, like, it would be a different instantaneous perception of something. And therefore it wouldn't exactly be like adding it like you would typically think of it. Anyway, sorry. Such magnitudes can also be called flowing magnitudes because the synthesis of the productive imagination, which creates them, is a progress in time. Huh. It's kind of what I was getting at. I think, maybe. I'll just say it was. The continuity of which we are wont to express by the term flowing or flowing away. Right. You can never step into the same river twice. Okay. This kind of makes sense. And so effectively, okay, I'm just reminding myself of the big picture. We have extension in time that is in a way numerical and therefore potentially mathematical, and that's how we have a priori thoughts related to it. And now we have degrees in time. Degrees of experience. The possible range of things in subjective perceptions that those things can be. Okay, sorry. All appearances are therefore continuous magnitudes, both according to their intuition as extensive and according to mere perception, sensation, and therefore reality, as intensive magnitudes. If there is an interruption in the synthesis of the manifold of appearance, we get only an aggregate of many appearances, not properly an appearance as a quantum. Right, meaning if there's like some sort of, if we just were given like a snapshot in time and we weren't able to like synthesize it, it would be just like a rhapsody of whatever Kant likes to say. I guess he only said it once, so he might not like to say it. Such an aggregate is not produced by the mere continuation of productive synthesis of a certain kind, but by the repetition of a synthesis that ends at every moment. Right. And the way we actually have experience is an aggregate of all these, first of all, extension and stuff, and then all the stuff that fills it, so the degrees of everything. If I call 13 tailors a quantum of money, TALERS, I don't know what denomination that is, but anyway, I am right provided that I understand by it the value of 1 mark of fine silver. This is a continuous magnitude in which no part of the smallest, but every part may constitute a coin which contains material for still smaller coins. But if I understand by it 13 round tailors, that is, so many coins, whatever their silver content may be, then I should be wrong in speaking of quantum of tailors, and should call it an aggregate, that is, a number of coins. Since every number must be founded on unity, appearance as unity is a quantum, and as such, always a continuum. Okay, I think I'm kind of there. If then all appearances, whether considered extensively or intensively, are continuous magnitudes, it might seem easy to prove with mathematical evidence that all alteration, transition of a thing from one state to another, must also be continuous, were it not that the causality of an alteration in general lies entirely outside the limits of transcendental philosophy and presupposes empirical principles. Okay. Meaning, like, he's talking about the potential continuation or, like, experience of a continuum in order, like, as our experience. And therefore, if that's how we experience things, like, maybe causation occurs within that continuum, but that's not possible, I guess, for reasons. For the understanding tells us nothing a priori of the possibility of a cause which alters the state of things. Okay. That is, determines them to the opposite of a given state. That makes sense. And this not only because the understanding does not have any insight into the possibility of it, for such insight is denied to us in several kinds of a priori knowledge, but because the alterability relates only to certain determinations of appearances, namely those that are taught by experience alone, while only their cause must lie in that which is unalterable. What? Like, what? For the understanding tells us nothing a priori of the possibility of a cause which alters the state of things. That is, determines them to be opposite of a given state. That makes sense to me. Like, a priori, like, without experiencing it, we don't know that heat is going to have any effect on turning water into gas. We have to experience, like, there's no rule, like, that doesn't have to be the case. Okay. In this, not only because the understanding does not have any insight to the possibility of it, okay, meaning, not because our understanding can't, well, our understanding can't, but that's not the point he's relying on, at least. For such insight is denied to us in several kinds of a priori knowledge, but because the alterability relates only to certain determinations of appearances, namely those that are taught by experience alone. Okay. Meaning the potential to be altered, e.g. cause and effect, is only, like, let's say water, for example. Water, when you add heat to it, does turn into whatever, but maybe, I don't know, something doesn't necessarily if you add heat to it. I guess most things do. Some things melt, although heat will come off of them. Like, okay, whatever, doesn't matter. While only their cause must lie in that which is unalterable. Okay. But as the only materials which we may use at present are the pure fundamental concepts of all possible experience, right? From which everything, come on, page, turn, empirical is excluded, we cannot, without injuring the unity of our system, anticipate general natural science, which is based upon certain fundamental experiences. Agree. That's kind of what I was getting at, Kant. What are you talking about, man? What are we talking about? Nevertheless, there is no lack of evidence of the great influence which our principle exercises in anticipating perceptions. Ow, ow. Nevertheless, there is no lack of evidence of the great influence which our principles exercise in anticipating perceptions, and even in making up for their absence, insofar as this principle stops any false inferences that might be drawn from this absence. If, therefore, all reality in perception has a degree between which and negation, there is an infinite succession of even smaller degrees, and if every sense must have a definite degree of receptivity of sensations, it follows that no perception, and therefore no experience, is possible that could prove immediately or mediately, by whatever roundabout inferences, a complete absence of all reality in appearance. Okay, that makes sense. We see, therefore, that experience can never supply a proof of empty space or an empty time. Okay? For the total absence of reality Oh, meaning if there's like nothing in it, that would still be like a degree. Like, since everything we experience on the spectrum, if there's like nothing there, it would still be like register as a nothing on the spectrum, which is still on the spectrum as opposed to like just not existing. I'm not sure I buy that, Kant. Okay. We see, therefore, that experience can never supply a proof of empty space or an empty time. For the total absence of reality, insensible intuition can itself never be perceived. For the total absence of reality, insensible intuition can never itself be perceived, nor can it be inferred from any single appearance whatsoever, and from the difference of degree in its reality. Okay. Nor ought it ever to be assumed in the explanation of this intuition. Okay. For although the total intuition of a certain space or time is real all through, that is, no part of it is empty, yet, as every reality has its degree which, while the extensive magnitude of the appearance remains unaltered, may diminish by infinitely many steps down to nothing, the void, there must be infinite different degrees in which space and time may be filled. And the intensive magnitude in different appearances may be smaller or greater, although the extensive magnitude as given in the intuition remains the same. Okay, what he's saying is like it not necessarily that it would like 0 on the scale is something on the scale. I think he's saying like every possible spectrum that we have that he's talking about, it can never hit 0. It can get closer and closer and closer to 0, but it'll never actually hit 0. Why? I don't know. That would be the void, I guess. Yeah, that's bad. Voids are bad. Avoid the void. We shall give an example. Oh, we shall give an example. Oh, okay, great. Almost all natural philosophers, like me, perceiving partly by means of the moment of gravity or weight, partly by means of the moment of resistance against other matter in motion, that there is a great difference in the quantity of various kinds of matter. There's a great difference in the quantity of various kinds of matter. Though the volume is the same, conclude unanimously that this volume, the extensive magnitude of the appearance, must in all of them, through varying degrees, be empty. Oh, yeah, this is the thing he's talking about in the lecture. So, like, I think what he's saying is, like if you have, like, a perfect square foot of every substance on the planet, like, because a square foot of lead weighs, I don't know, 80 pounds, and a square foot of water weighs 4 pounds, it must be that the water has way more empty space than the lead. Which is like a weird way to, in my head, it's a weird way to, maybe it's right, I don't know, it seems weird. Okay. Who could have thought that these mathematical and mechanical philosophers should have based such an inference solely on a metaphysical presupposition, which they always profess to avoid? For they assume that the real in space, I do not wish here to call it impenetrability or weight, because these are empirical concepts, is everywhere at the same time, and can differ only in its extensive magnitude, that is, in amount. Okay. I meet this presupposition, for which they could find no ground in experience, and which is therefore purely metaphysical, with a transcendental proof. Oh. Okay. This proof is not intended to explain the difference in the filling of spaces, but it will nevertheless entirely remove the imagined necessity of the presupposition which tries to explain that difference only by assuming empty spaces. And thus this proof at least restores to the understanding its liberty to explain to itself this difference in another way. If in the explanation of nature any other hypothesis be rendered necessary in order to account for this difference. Okay, let's have it, Kant. For we then see that although equal spaces are completely filled by different kinds of matter, so that there is no point in either of them where matter is not present, yet everything real has the quality, being the same, its degree of resistance or weight, which may, without any diminution of its extensive magnitude or amount, grow smaller and smaller ad infinitum before it reaches the void and vanishes. Okay, so everything, regardless of what it's made of or its weight, can approach zero onto infinity before it actually vanishes. All right. Thus a certain okay. Thus I was going to bring up atomic stuff, but it's whatever. Thus a certain expansion which fills a space, for instance heat, and likewise every other reality found in appearance, can, without leaving the smallest part of this space empty, diminish in its degree ad infinitum, and can nevertheless fill the space with its smaller degrees, quite as much as another appearance can with greater degrees. Okay. Meaning something could get smaller, but also just like expand slightly, and therefore have more space and take up the same amount of space. I think is what he's saying. I do not mean to say that this is really how different kinds of matter differ according to their specific of gravity. I only want to show... Okay, good. Because I was confused by that. I only want to show by a fundamental principle of the pure understanding that the nature of our perception renders such an explanation possible, and that it is wrong to look upon the real in appearance as equal in degree, and differing only in aggregation and extensive magnitude, and to maintain this on the alleged authority of an a priori principle of the understanding. Okay. Nevertheless, this anticipation of perception is apt to startle an inquirer, accustomed to and rendered cautious by transcendental reflection. And we may naturally wonder that the understanding should be able to anticipate such a synthetic proposition about the degree of all that is real in appearance, and therefore about the possibility of an inner difference in sensation itself, if we abstract from its empirical quality. And it seems therefore a question well worthy of a solution, namely, how the understanding can a priori pronounce synthetically about appearances, and how it can thus anticipate them with regard to what is, properly speaking, merely empirical and concerns only sensation. How the understanding can a priori pronounce synthetically about appearances, and how it can thus anticipate them with regard to what is, properly speaking, merely empirical and concerns only sensation. Has he done that? Because I'm not so sure. Okay. It's so weird. I don't know. It's a weird section. I don't know what the hell he's talking about. The quality of sensation, for instance, colors, tastes, etc., is always merely empirical and cannot be represented a priori. Okay? But the real that corresponds to sensations in general, as opposed to negation equals zero, only represents something the concept of which contains a being, and means nothing but the synthesis in an empirical consciousness in general. Means nothing but the synthesis in an empirical consciousness. Okay. In inner sense, this empirical consciousness can be raised from zero to any higher degree, so that the same extensive magnitude of intuition, for instance, an illuminated plane, excites as great a sensation as does an aggregate of many other less illuminated planes combined. It is quite possible, therefore, to abstract from the extensive magnitude of appearance, and yet to represent to oneself, in the mere sensation in one moment a synthesis of a uniform progress from zero to the given empirical consciousness. Okay? All sensations as such are therefore given only a posteriori, but their quality of possessing a degree can be known a priori. Okay. Meaning we don't know what we're going to experience until we actually experience it, but we can know that it is going to be on the spectrum of these things. Okay? And it's going to be greater than zero. It is remarkable that of magnitudes in general, we can know a priori only one quality, namely continuity, while with regard to all quality, the real of appearances, nothing more can be known to us a priori than the intensive quantity of appearances, that is, the fact that they have a degree. Everything else is left to experience. That makes sense to me. And I don't know what... I'm a little confused as to that middle part about the box, the space inside of something. Okay. Analogies of experience, really quick, then I'm going to go to bed, I think. I should go to bed. Analogies of experience. Experience is possible only through the representation of a necessary connection of perception. Okay, this one makes more sense to me, because I think it's just like time. Like we need a continuity of perceptions in order to have like experience as we understand it. Let me check something. Okay. Proof. Experience is an empirical knowledge. That is, a knowledge... How did he start the last? Didn't he start the last one pretty similarly? Perception is empirical consciousness. Okay. And now he's saying experience is an empirical knowledge. That is, a knowledge that determines an object through perceptions. It is therefore a synthesis of perceptions that is not itself contained in perception, but contains in one consciousness, right? One synthetic unity of the manifold of perception. Okay? Right. Experience is like everything that you have experienced, funneling through, as we've said a billion times at this point, being synthesized, and then the kicker is like it exists in one consciousness. Like that's kind of the important part. Maybe the most important part. This unity constitutes what is essential for our knowledge of objects of the senses, i.e. for experience, and not merely intuition or sensation of the senses. In experience, perceptions come together only contingently, so that no necessity of their connection could be discovered in the perceptions themselves. In experience, perceptions come together only contingently, so that no necessity of their connection could be discovered in perceptions themselves. Okay, yeah. Meaning, we probably connect everything that we perceive, but that doesn't mean that they have to be connected or are connected, except for within us as, the unity of the manifold. Okay. For apprehension is only a composition of the manifold of empirical intuition, yes, but contains no representation of the necessity of the connected existence in space and time of the appearances which it combines, yes. Experience, on the contrary, is a knowledge of objects through perceptions. And so, in experience, the relation in the existence of the manifold is to be represented, not as the manifold composed in time, but as it is objectively in time. Wait, what? Wait, hold on. So in experience, the relation in the existence of the manifold is to be represented not as the manifold composed in time, but as it is objectively in time. Not what I was expecting. Why? And so in experience, the relation in the existence of the manifold is to be represented not as the manifold composed in time, but as it is objectively in time. Okay, let's see. Now, as time itself cannot be perceived, the determination of the existence of objects in time can take place only through combining them in time in general. That is, through concepts connecting them a priori. What? Okay, now as time itself cannot be perceived, okay, the determination of the existence of objects in time can take place only through combining them in time in general. That is, through concepts connecting them a priori. Is he talking about like rules? Why wouldn't it just come through experience? No, but the concepts come a priori though? As these concepts always carry necessity with them, we are justified in saying that experience is possible only through a representation of the necessary connections of perceptions. Man, I'm so fucking frustrated with this. Like, what? I didn't even get this frustrated in the transcendental deduction, but I don't know what the fuck he's talking about. Now, as time itself cannot be perceived, got it, the determination of the existence of objects in time can take place only through combining them in time in general. Okay, so in order to like actually experience things, perceive things, and determine their the existence of objects, you know, we have to combine them in time. And we do that through concepts that connect them a priori. Would that be the categories? I guess. If that's true, I wish you would just fucking say it. Okay. As these concepts always carry necessity with them, we are justified in saying that experience is possible only through a representation of the necessary connections of perceptions. Alright, there's a footnote. I'm going to look at it. 51. Okay, it's just about the headings. The three modi of time are permanence, succession, and simultaneity. There will therefore be three rules governing all relations of appearances in time, whereby the existence of every appearance is determined with regard to the unity of all time. And these rules will precede all experience and render experience first of all possible. Okay, so we have permanence, succession, and simultaneity. There will therefore be three rules governing all relations of appearances in time. Where they're determined with regard to the unity of time. Okay, this kind of makes sense. The general principle of the three analogies rests on the necessary unity of apperception with regard to all possible empirical consciousness of perception at every time. Okay, meaning it's in one consciousness in all of time is in one consciousness in order to understand these potential rules. And as, consequently, this unity forms an a priori ground, the principle rests on the synthetic unity of all appearances, according to their relation in time. For original apperception refers to inner sense, the sum total of all representations, and it does so a priori to the form of inner sense, to the relation of the manifold empirical consciousness in time. Sorry, gotta reread that. For original apperception refers to inner sense, the sum total of all representations, and it does so a priori to the form of inner sense, that is, to the relation of the manifold empirical consciousness in time. All this manifold is to be united in the original apperception according to its relations of time. For this is what is meant by its a priori transcendental unity, to which all is subject, which is to belong to my, that is, to my one, knowledge, and thus to become an object for me. This synthetic unity in the temporal relation of all perceptions, which is determined a priori, is the law that all empirical determinations of time must be subject to the rules of the general determination of time. Okay. And the analogies of experience, of which we are now going to treat, must be rules of this kind. These principles have this peculiarity: that they do not refer to appearances and the synthesis of their empirical intuition, but only to the existence of appearances and their relation to one another with regard to their existence. They do not refer to appearances and the synthesis of their empirical intuition, but only to the existence of appearances and their relation to one another with regard to their existence. Meaning in time, yeah, okay. Right, okay. The manner, they only care about their relationship, like, in time. They don't actually care about, their actual content, I guess. I don't know. The manner in which something is apprehended in appearance may be so determined a priori that the rule of its synthesis can at the same time give this a priori intuition. Okay. How is this so fucking dense at this point? Like waiting for the point where it starts to come together, and it's not just like, it doesn't feel like I'm reading, it just feels so technical. Okay. The manner in which something is apprehended in appearance may be so determined a priori that the rule of its synthesis can at the same time give this a priori intuition, that is, can produce this a priori intuition in the case of any given empirical example. But the existence of appearances can never be known a priori. And although we might be led this way to infer something that exists, we should not be able to know it determinately. That is, we should not be able to anticipate that which distinguishes its empirical intuition from others. The two principles which we considered above, and which I called mathematical principles because they enable us to apply mathematics to appearances, referred to appearances only insofar as they are possible, and they showed us how, with regard both to their intuition and to the real in their perception, appearances can be produced according to the rules of a mathematical synthesis. Hence, in the one as well as in the other, we may use numerical magnitudes, and with them a determination of appearance as a magnitude. Thus I might, for example, compose the degree of the sensations of sunlight out of some 200,000 illuminations by the moon, and thus determine it a priori, that is, construct it. Those previous principles may therefore be called constitutive. Thus I might, for example, compose the degree of the sensations of sunlight out of some 200,000 illuminations by the moon. Oh, meaning you're not experiencing the sun, and thus determine it a priori without experiencing the sun. Okay. And that is called constitutive. Okay. The case is totally different with those principles which are meant to bring the existence of appearances a priori under rules. For as existence cannot be constructed, they can only refer to the relations of existence and become merely regulative principles. Here, therefore, we cannot think of either axioms or anticipations. And if a perception is given in a temporal relation to other, although indeterminate perceptions, we could not say a priori what the other perception is or how great a perception it is. But we can say how, with respect to its existence, it is necessarily connected with the others in this mode of time. Okay. I think big picture, he's just saying, like, these things, they can tell us something about their relation in time, but we can't actually know anything about their content a priori. In philosophy, analogies mean something very different from what they represent in mathematics. In the latter, mathematics, they are formulas which state the equality of two quantitative relations, and they are always constitutive. So that if three members of the proportion are given, the fourth is also given by it, that is, can be constructed out of it. In philosophy, on the contrary, the analogy is not the equality of two quantitative, but of two qualitative relations. So that if three members are given, we can know and give a priori only the relation to a fourth, but not this fourth member itself. All I can thus gain is a rule for seeking the fourth member in experience, or a characteristic mark by which I may find it there. An analogy of experience can therefore be no more than a rule, whereby unity of experience may arise from perceptions, but not telling us how perception itself is empirical intuition in general may arise, This analogy may be valid as a principle for objects, that is, appearances, not in a constitutive, but only in a regulative way. Okay. Exactly the same applies to the postulates of empirical thought in general, which concern the synthesis of mere intuition, the form of appearance, the synthesis of perception, the matter of them, and the synthesis of experience, the relation of these perceptions. They too are only regulative principles, and they differ from the mathematical, which are constitutive, not in their certainty, which is established in both a priori, but in the character of their evidence, that is, in their intuitive character, and therefore also in their demonstration. Okay. I think what he's saying is, like, mathematics stuff kind of has to be the case based on their demonstration, but even if we have kind of appearances and stuff, that's only what we are perceiving. It doesn't necessarily have to be the case, I think is what he's saying. Frankly, I'm kind of frazzled and not really getting, I don't know. It's frustrating. What has been marked, okay, last paragraph, here we go. What has been remarked of all synthetic principles, and must be emphasized here more particularly, is that these analogies have their meaning and validity not as principles of the transcendental, but only as principles of the empirical use of the understanding. Okay, I understand that, synthetic principles. They can be established only in this character, and appearances must therefore be subsumed not directly under the categories, but only under their schemata. Okay, I'm going to start at the first sentence again. God fucking damn it. What has been remarked of all synthetic principles, and must be emphasized more particularly here, is that these analogies have their meaning and validity not as principles of the transcendental, but only because they're not, the synthesis means they're effectively, they're not definitional. We have to figure something out outside of what we know about them based on their identity, but only as principles of the empirical use of the understanding. And even if we're able to figure them out kind of a priori, it's still through our use of the understanding. Okay. They can be established only in this character. Okay. And appearances must therefore be subsumed not directly under the categories, because the categories are a priori, but under their schemata. For if the objects to which these principles are to be referred were things in themselves, it would be perfectly impossible to know any of them synthetically a priori. Okay, we've gone over that. But they are nothing but appearances, and a complete knowledge of them, which, after all a priori principles must lead to, is simply our possible experience. Those principles therefore can aim at... Sorry, I have to reread that. But they are nothing but appearances. Okay? And a complete knowledge of them, which, after all a priori principles must lead to, is simply our possible experience. Okay. Makes sense. Those principles therefore can aim at nothing but the conditions of the unity of empirical knowledge in the synthesis of appearances. But this unity is thought only in the schema of the pure concept of the understanding. The category contains the function, restricted by no sensible condition, of the unity of the schema as of a synthesis in general. I knew I should have paid more attention during the schema section. These principles will therefore authorize us to combine appearances only by an analogy with the logical and universal unity of concepts. Okay. So that, though in using the principle we use the category, in practice, in the application of the principle to appearances, we shall put the schema of the category as a practical key in the place of the category, or rather put it alongside the category as a restricting condition, as being what may be called a formula of the category. Okay, I'm calling it. That's the end of that section. We're on to the first analogy, page 207. I don't know. Of my entire journey through this, all five... Well, I've been this frustrated a couple of times, in particular when I got to the transcendental deduction and I was reading the incorrect one, which I didn't realize until much later. I was just I threw my hands in the air. I was like, what the fuck? This is impenetrable gobbledygook, which I'm kind of feeling now for a lot of this. So yeah, I'll probably just reread this to just, I don't really know, try to figure some more stuff out, but okay, hold on, just yeah, I don't know what the fuck he's saying. I was gonna try to summarize it, but I don't have it in me. But yeah, we'll try to keep plugging along with the first analogy.